Hi, here we are with another PMO Career Hour session. What we tend to do with these sessions is do them with a live audience. Tends to be a small number of people where we can talk openly, freely about the subjects around PMO careers. So what I do afterwards is just do a straightforward recording of some of the things that we covered to let you know what's being covered on this particular session, and you can have a browse through the presentation as well. So this week it is about securing a better paid job. So these are kind of things that we were talking about during this session. So we looked at better paid jobs to just understand from people that were in the session and what had drawn them to this particular session. We also looked at practical steps, what's involved in terms of trying to increase your pay. We talked about pay rise conversations and promotions, and then also looked at why you're not being paid what you're worth. And then also dived into some theories that exist around payment, employment, that kind of thing, so people could have a browse at their leisure. There's some of the other things that are out there. So when we first started the session, I just wanted to understand, what it is that people, why they were drawn to the session, and also what they'd thought about this, about, when we talk about a better paid job, what are we really talking about? And I suppose pluses and minuses, or negatives and positives, to both sides of this. So, for example, a job, with better pay come with more responsibility, takes more time, might eat into your life, work-life balance. There could be things that that you're wanting to get paid more for the work that you're doing and how to go about doing that. Here's the the things that we shared on the session, and got people to to think about in terms of what is it that's drawn them to this particular session. And what we found was that there were some people that it's just about just being recognized for the role that you're doing and being rewarded or compensated for that. There's people, it's about looking for the next step in terms of moving onwards and upwards from where they are. With some examples where people are already acting up, so working as an analyst, but doing the management role, but not being rewarded for that. And there's also that word value, about getting paid for the value that's actually being delivered to the organisation. But also, on the other side, around salaries, is that recognition that, maybe perhaps contracting freelance work, will bring better pay for doing the same kind of role. And for some, it's just, wanting to understand, what kind of things they can be thinking about that might be beneficial for raising their wage level. So that's how we got started. So in terms of the practical steps then, there'll be things on here that no surprise to you. These are the things that are in our control, things that we can possibly be thinking about that will help to increase our salaries. So first of all, we looked at and focused on the ones that were all around kind of skills and experience. And specifically, we talked about this one around scarce skills. And the example that I gave during the session was what we're seeing, with an example of a PMO analyst that I'd met about 18 months ago, that's doing the normal role of a PMO analyst, looking at all the usual things, supporting around planning, risk, change, control, doing all the things you would expect to see. And they've been given this opportunity from their organisation because they're wanting to go down the route of getting better at the data management, reporting, insights, all of that kind of good stuff. This PMO analysts have been given the opportunity to do the apprenticeship that exists for project data analytics. Now, 18 months later, down the line, as they've started to build up, some really good skills where they're now recognizing that there's going to be a lot more of this happening in organizations in the coming years. They're already starting to, get in there early, as it were. In other words, starting to build what are classed as still seen as scarce skills. So for them, it's been thinking about, where this opportunity that landed in their lap, but now 18 months later, they can start to see that they're building up some scarce skills, which, other organizations are going to be interested in that, if not now, but certainly in the near future. We also talked about the one around softer skills, and that if you think about some of the other aspects of the role that PMOs are doing now, we've come from seeing PMOs working at very much at a supporting level where, it's always been known as kind of administrative support. And what's been happening over the last decade or so is that the PMO has been changing, just as organizations have been doing more and more projects and programs, moving into portfolio management as a way to manage those projects and programs. And the PMO has been changing to reflect that too, to provide support. And what they're finding is that the PMO roles themselves is now it's not just a role where you're supporting on some of the technical aspects of projects and program management by doing the reporting, for example, is that actually you're utilizing a lot more of what we class as softer skills. So that's like stakeholder engagement, it's the communication with senior management, it's the influencing, it's the negotiation, it's the coaching, it's the mentoring, all of these things that are required as the work in PMO has got more complex and complicated to support the way that organizations are going with their projects and programs. So has too some of the requirements on what the PMO skill set's about, and that nice balance between the technical and the softer skill. They're building up more experience in being able to support more complex projects and programs, and now working at portfolio levels too. And with that comes the ability to earn a lot more. So that's how we started with the skills stuff. So the other three bits that were, there's the obvious things where you could, move into management. That will bring hopefully a bigger pay rise. Is thinking about where you're working in terms of location, but also the industry sector, because we know some organizations and PMOs pay more than others. And then, of course, taking on more accountability and responsibility. The thing that really struck me as we were doing this session is something that I've not really thought about before, which is actually it depends on the kind of PMO that you're working in, has a big effect on how much you will earn. And I think we've seen that again over the years as we've been moving from that supporting type PMO into supporting large programs of work. And now more frequently, you're seeing people operating at a program office level on project and in the portfolio office level. And as people are starting to do that, because of the work being more complex at that level, is that the skills and experience required need to be higher, and therefore the salaries, reflecting that. But I've never actually really made that connection between, it really does depend on what kind of PMO you're working in, what context it is, whether it's supporting projects, programs, portfolios, or enterprise level, actually will have an impact on the kind of salary levels that you could expect to see for working in those as well. So it's an interesting perspective that I've never really thought about, one for you to think about too. We also talked about pay rises, because that's obviously one of the things that people, automatically, when you think about how can I secure a better paid job, other than going out and finding a new job on an open market and, going down that route, is to think about, where you're already working. So we talked a little about, has anybody had those kind of conversations yet? Have you done it so far in your career? Have you done it recently? And not many examples, to be fair. So really, it's not something that certainly people on this session had experience of. So we just looked at what the process is, because like all good PMO people, we like to plan. If we know the plan and we know a structure or a framework to work within, it makes it a lot easier. But there was two things that we focused on specifically here, which was this conversation around salary benchmarking and also the one about documenting achievements. We had this big conversation about, how do we know how much we are worth? How do we do that salary benchmarking? And again, it's a mix of, I look at roles that are out there in the open market that might be advertised. I have a general idea because of the kind of salary bandings that my organization works in for particular roles. But that's, is as far as it goes. And I think one of the other suppose the opposite perspective to that is to think from yourself in terms of the kind of skills, experience that you've already had and what you've built up and the kind of differences you've made in your PMO roles to different organizations, is starting to build up, from the other side is what I think I might be worth based on this combination, but also thinking about, where I want to be in relation to, the mortgage I'm paying, the children I'm bringing up and all of that kind of stuff as well. And actually doing a bit more of a salary benchmark on yourself in terms of this is what I think I've got and this is what I think it's been worth to the organization. But equally, I've got a line here that I know that I need to be earning at that level too. So it's an interesting one because there's no clear cut answers because of the, different organizations, different PMOs all have kind of different bandings for different types of PMO roles. The other thing there, as you said, was that we probably don't do enough in terms of documenting our achievements as we go along. And one of the things that's crucial when you're thinking about a pay rise conversation is you're going to be expected to be, blowing your own trumpet about what it is that you've been doing that kind of puts you in the line for the promotion. So there's a few things there, but it was interesting that, one of the the problem here is twofold. In one, we don't have enough experience in pay rise conversations. And as we know, that practice makes perfect. So there's something that we've already, recognized that we're not doing enough of. But I think the second thing that we pulled out there as well was going and linking back to the behavioral skills bit, was that if we were better at things like influencing and negotiations, we would be able to utilize some of those skills, techniques, approaches, whatever you want to call them, in conversations like this. This is a difficult conversation. So, what kind of things do I need help on to be able to do better in those kind of conversations? So that was a really interesting conversation and perspectives as well. So then we moved on to the other side of it, which is obviously promotions. And we talked about, a 10-step approach. Now, again, it's just a reminder that a lot of these things are in your control. And that's what we're aiming for, the things that we can influence, the things that we can change, where we're not just relying on somebody just, turning us down for promotions or pay rises, that we, can at least know that we have given it the best shot that we can. And these were the 10-step approaches to, things that you could be doing to increase your chances of promotion. We also then asked the question, is which do you find the easiest, or, which would be classed as being quite hard to do? So let's just pick out a couple that were interested in terms of the conversations. So here we can see that, in terms of, promotions around any role really within an organization, the more visible that you are for the good reasons, the more people, can see what it is that you're doing and what you're contributing, the easier it can be when it comes to those promotions. So that's the networking and relationships side of stuff. And again, we link that back to what we're saying about how the way that PMOs are changing in terms of who they're interacting with on a day-to-day basis. And certainly if you're working at that kind of big program portfolio level where you are interacting with more senior members of the organization, it stands to reason that, that can be worth its worth in gold when it comes to, the promotions and opportunities. So that was classed as one of the easiest ones for as people that could start, on the session, that they could start to think about how they become better at that or doing more at that. The other one that was classed as being quite hard was this highlighting contributions and achievements, because we said, how often do we get the chance to do that, and what mechanisms and avenues is there to do that? Because it feels very much like it's only perhaps once a year through performance evaluation meetings and things like that. I gave an example that I'd heard from another PMO, which I thought were really interesting, which was, the PMO needs to be demonstrating more about what it is it does. We're very much backroom people, and we need to be showing more about what the work that PMO is doing and the impacts it has and the value that it brings. So this particular PMO, what they've done, they've been utilizing their own hub. So this is their own SharePoint site that they've built for, to use with the delivery organization. So people come for it for advice or templates or, what's the methods and all that kind of stuff. And just quite simply in their hub is that, once a month, they're highlighting what has been one of the main achievements of the PMO, what contributions I might have made that month. And ability to take that on to the next level will be to highlight some of the individuals that got involved in that particular achievement and put a spotlight on them for a month or so. So it's like we've got to think about the way that we can highlight what the PMO is doing, and through that we can also highlight individual contributions and achievements as well. There's a lot more things that we can think around that, but I think again, that was classed as one of the hardest things for this group today. Then we had a look at the reasons why you're possibly not being paid what you think you're worth, and I love these examples, especially the ones that are quite harsh, which is well, you don't deserve one. But these are just a good, straightforward reasons why you won't be getting a pay rise. And I think a lot of people at the moment are probably struggling with the economy being a great reason and sometimes an excuse as to why pay rises are not forthcoming within the business. But there are things here that very much reflect on ourselves, which is, actually you're perhaps not as good as you think you are. You may have become quite complacent, that you don't blow your own trumpet, which is we talked about in terms of achievements. But equally, many of us don't ask. And that comes back to that whole thing again, where we're not used to having those kind of conversations, or, within our organization, it's not really, that's not the way that things get done like that. But, actually, bottom line is if you don't ask, you're never going to get that opportunity to see whether you would get that pay rise or not. So a number of things on there, and some of them quite harsh. It's certainly the one around you don't deserve one. We asked on the House of PMO LinkedIn group, which if you'd like to join the group and you're not already, just pop onto LinkedIn and type in House of PMO and look for the group. And it's the group where we share a lot of other bits and pieces that allow people to obviously comment and discuss and debate things and that kind of thing. But we put a poll just based on 4 of those choices that you could see on the previous slide. And we kind of guessed that this was the way that it would go. That the biggest reason on this, again, just a small poll, one of the top reasons why you're not being paid what you're worth is that you're not being valued by the organization, which comes back down to that V word, or what do we mean by value? And to be fair, it has very much been one of the word of the 20s. That's the 2020s. We hear a lot about, our PMO is not adding value, or our PMO is a added value PMO. And, this word value, where I think part of the issue is that we don't clearly define what value a PMO offers, or we don't clearly understand what my role as a PMO analyst, PMO manager actually offers, and value that it provides. So it's partially our own thinking. We can easily band around the word like we don't get valued for what it is that we do. So one of the things we just looked at really briefly was, well, what is this reason why the PMO doesn't get valued? And I think we all recognize that there's a lot of people out there that don't understand what a PMO is, and therefore what your role is and what it is that you're doing. There's still this thing where a lot of people within the organization see the PMO as a overhead and don't see some of the other value which we think we're offering, but other people are not seeing it. And then obviously we know that PMOs are not valued if they're not valued from the highest level. So that kind of stakeholder support, the reason why it's there in the first place. That again, the PMO is not interacting with its stakeholders. And certainly what we've seen over the last few years is that the PMO is moving from that support type function to being more of a service provider. We offer services, and those services are dependent on what the stakeholders want, our customers want. So there's been a shift in the way that we think of how we operate and what services we provide, and how are they utilized by stakeholders, what problems do they solve, and all of that kind of good stuff. So it has allowed the PMO to at least start to get to a point where it can start to understand its impact of, if we provide services around planning or risk or change, whatever it might be, we can see that, what the baseline is today versus what the difference is after the PMOs got involved. So in other words, we're talking about the metrics and things. But we just thought it was worth just putting from those kind of reasons why the PMO is not valued, into looking at all those kind of great PMOs that we've seen over the years, the ones that win awards, the ones that have just gone, are quietly getting on with it and doing it well. These are the 5 different things that these PMOs are doing to demonstrate that value, to be needed within their organizations, to be, not only the PMO valued, but the people working within it. And if you look at these 5, again, in our session today, we said, that pretty much hits the nail on the head. It is these things. So that gives us some areas where we can be thinking about, if we want to increase the value of what it is we're doing and the perception of that value, and to be recognized for that, these are perhaps some of the things you need to be addressing within your PMO today. And again, we just talked really briefly about the talk last at the PMO conference, which was focused on the APM PMO of the Year award winner. One of the things that they had certainly done in a short space of time, but had a big impact, was to look at their metrics. So to be able to demonstrate, as I said, the difference that the PMO is making between, previously not being involved in a certain area versus actually the PMO is now involved and we can see an improvement in X, Y, and Z. Sounds like simple stuff, but I think we all appreciate it's hard. But hey, that's why we all like to work in PMO, because it gets this thinking, about how we can overcome some of the challenges. And then finally, we looked at some of the other theories and things that are around this whole space, which was one that was, it is all about mindset. It's about having the self-confidence and the self-empowerment, the self-belief that, what you're doing is good stuff, but it has a value, it has a worth, and you really, think that you're not being valued enough or being compensated enough for the value that you're bringing. And that interestingly, these things are motivation and drive, but also obviously the environment in which you're doing it. Those are the 3 things that have a big impact on the self-confidence and self-belief, that you are doing what you're doing, and you think you're doing a good job and should be rewarded for that. So that was the first one. The second one was actually from the closing keynote from the PMO conference in 2022, where we had a session which was getting more into the working with senior execs. And the really interesting one, this was about our relationship with figures of authority in hierarchy, and actually how we form these kind of relationships very early on in our lives with our parents, our teachers, and then obviously later in life with our bosses. But actually your relationship with them is formed at that very early age. So for example, I shared, I was quite a shy child, and I think about how I was, with my parents and teachers, quite quiet in class and all that kind of thing. And I sometimes think, after listening to this session, I sometimes wonder whether I'm still got some deep-seated stuff from the way that I might have been from a child that still lingers on in terms of relationships with other, powers of authority or any of that kind of stuff that might have a long-term effect from there, but actually it's not who I am now as an adult, if you know what I mean. But I think it was an interesting one, because you think some people, don't want to get into that conversation of asking for a pay rise, who don't want to blow their own trumpet, who don't want to talk about, the achievements that they've made, because it's just not something that they do. And so my question would be, is like, I wonder if you know why that might be the case, and it might have something to do with this. That interestingly, you can go from two extremes with this, is that you could be quite submissive or you could be quite rebellious, obviously, with hierarchy as well. But it's just an interesting one about how you take control of certain aspects, and actually, some of the ways that we are really deep-seated. And then finally was all of those kind of business theories, economic theories, employment, all of that kind of stuff. There are a lot of theories that kind of sit behind why, we get paid more than other people. I think we can all recognize supply and demand. If you look back at the recession of 2008, suddenly the market was flooded with lots of project related people, not many roles going on, salary levels were driven down. We're not at that point anymore, but, again, I think the markets is trying to quite stable. The other ones are things like human capital theory, which is all about the differences in people's kind of skills, education, knowledge, experience, obviously brings different wage differentials, and that, people that are, that have more experience will get paid more for it. That's the basic theory, but I think we can also see that doesn't play out in a lot of cases. We've got job complexity theory, which again, we've kind of covered and linked to the fact that, if you're working in a more portfolio-led type PMO versus working at a project level, chances are that you're probably getting paid more for the work that you do at a portfolio level than you would do if you were working at a project level. It's because the role becomes more complex, that there's higher levels of complex, there's more problem solving going on, there's more decisions being made, there's more responsibility, and of course with that becomes, higher wages. We've got this thing, obviously there's always discrimination, so there's the gender pay gap, there's links to things like racial discrimination, physical disabilities, things like that have a bearing, obviously. And then we've got like the bargaining power theory as well, which was about how wages can be influenced by the bargaining power of workers and employers. So, those that with higher bargaining power, such as those with strong labour unions or occupations with scarce skills, can negotiate higher wages due to their ability to exert more influence over employers. So there's that kind of bargaining thing that can go on. And that, again, is what we've the example that I gave about the person that has been working around data analytics and bringing more of that into the PMO work, would potentially, further down the line, have that bargaining power. Do I stay with the employee that I'm currently with, or do I move on and take my skills elsewhere? So yeah, it's all interesting stuff. So that's what we did, that's what we covered, and I think all in all, it went down really well. And so if you'd like to join us for any other PMO career hours in future, just take a look at the events website, part of the website. Every other month we run an hour. Like I said, it's a smaller group, tends to be more talkative, chatty, understanding of other people's experiences. You can also check out the library from all the previous career hours we've done as well. So and if you'd like to see a particular subject being covered on Career Hour, please do get in touch and let us know. So for now, thank you very much.